you to today's webinar on how to transparency, where we're going to discuss everything about the BTR's requirements, the two shall chapters to be specific. This is our second webinar in our series, It's BTR Time. Last week, we introduced the transparency in relation to the Paris Agreement, its interlinkages to NDCs and the GST, and the benefit it brings and the international and domestic benefits it brings to, or in other words, why transparency is relevant. This week, we, as I kind of said, want to move forward by looking more specifically at how to transparency. For that, we will kind of have 1.5 hours to just kind of go into maybe a short introduction of what the BTR is, and then delve into the GHG inventories with a specific example on the waste sector, and then kind of move into the NDC indicators, followed by a short interactive exercise. And at the end, we are also going to just kind of shortly introduce one of our own bilateral support tools that we have. Now, obviously, it is very, very important to us that you can ask questions, which is why we have included Q&A sessions all throughout today's sessions. So please feel free to ask your questions or post them in chat throughout the webinar. I'm going to take a note of them and then get back to you later. In that sense of community, we also invite you to turn on your cameras, that is, if your internet connection allows you to, and kind of having all the logistical things on the way. I'm very happy to welcome our speakers today, Christina, Lawrence, and Simona. Now, Christina is from the Öko Institute, and she has been there since 2019. Before that, she worked for the Ministry of the Environment of Peru and for the Ministry of Environment of Germany. She's been actively participating in the UNFCCC process until 2018. And by training, she's originally a biologist, so a lot of different insights coming from her. And then we have Lawrence, who's also an expert at the Öko Institute, specifically for greenhouse gas inventories and projections. He has participated in the UNFCCC negotiations in the area of transparency since 2017. And by training, he is an environmental scientist. And last but not least, we have our very own Simona with us today. She has been a policy advisor at PATPA since 2021. She is also the regional coordinator of the Cluster Lusophone and is working on some of our bilateral country support. Again, thank you three for speaking with us today, or to us today, and we're very happy to have you here. Now, with that, obviously the usual rules, or like netiquette, as some like to refer to it, please keep yourself muted unless you're being asked to speak or you've raised your hand. And with that, I'm very happy to give the word first to Simona to talk to us shortly on what BTRs are.
Yeah, hello, also from my side. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are based. And thanks, Sophie, for this very nice introduction. I'll try to share my screen and please let me know if you can see it. Yeah, perfect. That should be working. So today's topic, or in today's webinar, as Sophie already said, we want to focus on GHG inventories and NDC indicators. And we already had a first session last week on the basics of transparency. So what transparency actually means under the Paris Agreement. And I highly recommend you, if you're not familiar with transparency under the Paris Agreement, to watch the recording of our last session where Christina and Lawrence also highlighted the importance of transparency and also it's interlinkages actually with the NDCs, so with the national determined contributions, so the national targets, but also with the global stocktake. And it was a really insightful session, but nevertheless, to set the scene and the basics for today, I also want to quickly refer again to transparency under the Paris Agreement, and this is under the Article 13 of the Paris Agreement, the enhanced transparency framework is established, and Article 13 also is operationalized with the modalities, procedures, and guidelines, so the MPGs and the transparency guidance. So this kind of new transparency framework, which enters into full force in this year, has different purposes. Here we highlighted on the slide already the purpose of the ETF to build mutual trust and confidence, and also to promote effective implementation. It is also an important framework, since now it's a shared framework for all parties. So the framework is for all countries the same. There's a wide participation, but the countries can make use of specific flexibility. Therefore, the framework also fosters accountability, since transparency is a central component for the successful implementation of the Paris Agreement, and tracking also the progress in implementation. And with the ETF, we also hope to get a better picture, because we increase the frequency of reporting also for developing countries. On the next slide, I hope now it moved. You can see that the BTR, or the biannual transparency reports, are not entirely new, but they build on previous arrangements that already were into force under the convention, and these were the national communications and the biannual update reports. And with this color frame, you can also see what actually fits again into the BTRs, and therefore, the system is not completely reinvented, but many parts can be adopted. And I already mentioned that the first BTR is to be presented by the 31st of December of this year, the latest, and then every 2 years thereafter. But why are we then today focusing actually on GHG inventories and NDC indicators? This is where this table also comes in, which shows you the key elements of the biannual transparency report. And in deep orange, you can see that national GHG inventories are part of the mandatory part of the BTR. But the small star also shows that countries can take or can have flexibility in their reporting. And we will, or Lawrence will actually dive deeper into the topic on GHG inventories later on, with a specific focus also on the waste sector. And just below this national GHG inventory mandatory element, you can see that it's also mandatory to report on information necessary to track progress in implementing and achieving an NDC. And for that, we need progress indicators to actually be able to track progress. So having said that national GHG inventories and also tracking progress are mandatory elements of the biannual transparency report. This is the reason why we are today focusing on these two topics. And you may wonder, okay, but why are you actually then also focusing on the waste sector? I want you to share some more information about the waste sector, since you may be aware that emissions arising from the treatment and disposal of liquid and solid waste are relatively low, but as you can see in this table, they have risen continuously in many developing countries due to changing production and consumption patterns, and they are expected to continue to increase in the absence of mitigation actions. On the other hand, the experiences gathered with mitigation actions in many countries have shown that significant emission reductions at relatively low cost are actually possible in the sector. And therefore, we see the waste sector as a very good example as well, as it has a great potential to achieve sustainable development, co-benefits, which of course is a critical factor also in the decision making of countries. And yeah, having given you this background information now on the BTR mandatory requirements and on the importance of the waste sector, I would like to hand over again to Sophie.
Thank you, Simone, for that very nice and very brief overview of the ETF and the BTR specifically, and also for that little input on the waste sector. Well, being on the topic of the waste sector, Lawrence is now going to guide us through a bit more of the specifics of the GHG inventories and how this relates to the waste sector. So I'd like to hand over to you, Lawrence.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this webinar. I will now start sharing my screen and showing the presentation on the greenhouse gas inventories. What I'm planning to show to you is a brief overview of reporting requirements, and then look into some examples from the waste sector. What I'm presenting is based on a knowledge product, a study which is available at the PATPA website. So you're welcome to look into this study for more detail. What I'm showing here is similar to what Simone already said, an overview of reports and topics. This figure now contains, in addition, an overview of the inventory reporting guidelines. And what we're interested in now is what changed with the Paris Agreement. So basically, there are still national communications and they're still being reported under the convention. There is not really a change now. What's important, especially this year, are the biannual transparency reports, which are a new requirement for all parties to the Paris Agreement. It's just good to know that biannual reports and biannual update reports have already been around, and they're also a source of information and a source that helps us now preparing the biannual transparency reports. What's important is that they include a national inventory report. Such inventory reports have also been around under the convention. They were required for developed countries. Also, some developing countries already presented such reports. Just as a background information, those reports are still required for developed countries every year. And for all countries, they're required biannually as part of the biannual transparency report. Now, if you look at the inventory guidelines, basically under the convention, there's a wide range of guidelines that are still in use or have been mandatory or have been used by parties. And now under the Paris Agreement, it's simpler. All parties shall use the 2006 IPCC guidelines, and they may, on a voluntary basis, also make use of the refinement, the 2019 refinement. And I think, especially for the example of the waste sector, it's very useful to have this refinement. It does not replace the old guidelines. It just provides additional methods, additional information, such as emission factors, which are very useful and help in providing an up-to-date and a high-quality greenhouse gas inventory. Now, what are the contents of the National Inventory Report under the Paris Agreement? Let's look at the wording. In the guidelines, you find the wording National Inventory Report. And now, under the Paris Agreement, it means two things. The National Inventory Report, it consists of a so-called National Inventory document, and then separately of the common reporting tables. The national inventory document, there's an outline for this document, which shows that it consists of executive summary, cross-cutting information trends, and then what I think is most important, sector chapters, providing detail on the greenhouse gas emissions and removals from the various sectors, and then two rather short chapters in the end. The outline for this document can be found in a decision which was adopted in Glasgow and which you can find under this link. In this decision, also the common reporting tables were adopted. Here's just a small example. Basically, those are tables for the electronic reporting of greenhouse gas emissions and removals by sector, by category, and by gas, as shown in this schematic figure. So those are just some aspects of greenhouse gas inventory reporting. As I said, we have this good practice study in greenhouse gas inventories for the waste sector. That's a study or report which is intended for greenhouse gas inventory compilers, but also for experts who are involved in policy development in the waste sector. And it addresses practical aspects related to greenhouse gas inventories and is intended mainly for developing countries. Now, in this document, some good practices are addressed, which really apply to greenhouse gas inventory in general. One is the institutionalization of the importance of having procedures and responsibilities that stay the same over time for multiple years. Then there's a chapter on methodological choice, like the basics, which are founded on the IPCC, guidelines to apply key category analysis, and then use higher tier methods for key categories. That's also especially important for the waste sector. Then there's some information on time series consistency, how to deal with gaps in the data, and on quality assurance and quality control. And all those issues now are especially important now that we are preparing the biannual transparency reports under the Paris Agreement. Now let's move from the general inventory development to the waste sector. I think Simone also mentioned it, so it's emissions from both waste and wastewater. There are the four subsectors presented here: solid waste disposal, then biological treatment of solid waste, incineration, open burning, and then the wastewater subsector. And for these subsectors, we have information in this knowledge product in this study, and we also refer to the refinement. And it's useful also in the waste sector because it provides additional guidance on various subsectors. It provides new methods, then also updated parameters and new emission factors, which just help in developing a state-of-the-art greenhouse gas inventory. Let's look at one example, the subsector of solid waste disposal. There's really a lot of decisions to be made, various types of data to be gathered. And in this study, we have several topics addressed: the disaggregation of population data, waste generation rates, share of the waste landfilled, and then where it is landfilled in which site category, and what's its composition. So that's basically 5 points which are related to the input data just for the solid waste disposal. Then in some countries, we have a recovery of landfill gas. There the question is how to mirror this in the greenhouse gas inventory. And finally, which parameters and with which methods are best for the emission estimation in a particular country and in a particular situation. With this, I would like to show some conclusions from that study, from that document. And I would say the waste sector is an important source of greenhouse gas emissions. Greenhouse gas inventories do not serve just one purpose, but several purposes. So the compliance with the reporting requirements, but also awareness raising, and both for the emissions which are going on and the practices which are there. And then this can provide input for policy development and mitigation actions. And the whole issue is especially timely and important now that the reporting of final transparency reports under the Paris Agreement is on the way. With this, I'm closing my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lawrence, for those insights. And with that, we're actually going to come to our first kind of little time for a Q&A. So do any of you have any questions regarding that specific topics on greenhouse gas inventories or the waste sector? You can happily either raise your hand, you can maybe even write them in the chat. I'm happy to read them out for you. Well, Christina.
Yeah, just Lawrence, from your experience, what are common challenges for building GHG inventories in the waste sector? Can you?
Yes, I would say it's similar to other sectors. It's just a challenge of having the data available and having the data available over time. And the waste sector is particular because you dispose of waste and it creates emissions over time. So what you disposed of in the past is emitted now and in the future. And that's why it's especially important to have time series, to have old data available. And that's one of the bigger challenges in the waste sector compared to other sectors.
On that note, I may actually have a follow-up question. So how do we then best kind of deal with the fact, well, if there's no time series of data available, how would kind of best combat that? Or is there a good way to balance it and still kind of produce a good GHG inventory?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the typical approaches are a proxy time series. Like if you start with just the development of the population, you can then make assumptions on like rural population or urban population, which have a different waste generation rates. So basically, you just start with the information which you have available. You can also just talk to other countries. What kind of data do they use? How do they then collect the data? So it's really what's helpful is exchanges, and that's what we also see, and many of those also joining here, that just exchanges between countries help in getting ideas how to collect the data.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Well, if you do still end up, if something comes to your mind, we're going to have, as I said, multiple question and answer blocks throughout this webinar, so we can kind of maybe get back to them if there's nothing coming to your mind right now. And if that is the case, I would actually already ask Christina to start us off with moving kind of into the other big shell requirement of the BTR, the NDC progress.
Yes, I'm already sharing my screen. Now it should pop up. Yes, you can see it?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so thank you very much for having me. It's good to have such a big crowd. As Sophie said, I will be speaking about NDC progress indicators. As a background, you may be very aware that currently existing NDCs contain different types of targets. A very common one also because this is the target type of developed countries since the Kyoto Protocol are the absolute emission reduction or limitation targets. They used to be called objectives relative to a base year. For example, reducing the greenhouse gas emissions by 60% compared to 1990 by 2030, and this target is expressed in million tons of CO2 equivalents, for example. There are also targets expressed relative to a BAU level. So the business as usual level would say, okay, by 2030, my emissions would be at a certain level. If I don't change anything, my target will be to change things. So I will be below this BAU by, I don't know, 20%. Then fixed level targets. This is a target, for example, put forward by Argentina. They have said they will not exceed a certain amount of emissions in 2030. An intensity target specifies a reduction of emissions per unit of another variable, very commonly GHG emissions compared to GDP. This is a target, for example, put forward by India. Then, of course, there can also be targets specific to sectors. For example, the energy sector that could have a target related to energy efficiency or related to the land sector. A target could be expressed in terms of increasing forest cover. And another type of target could be related to a specific mitigation action. So it would not be expressed in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, but for example, an action of shifting transport from individual-based transport to more public transport. The Enhanced Transparency Framework, as was said, establishes the obligation to track progress on implementation and achievement of NDCs. And the modalities, procedures, and guidelines which operationalize this Enhanced Transparency Framework, instead of prescribing in detail what that information for tracking progress is, took the approach of referring to indicators. And each party has the obligation to identify the indicators selected for tracking progress. And these indicators need to be relevant for the NDC. So that is also a shall requirement. And the MPGs also provide examples of indicators as they were developed with a number of NDCs available. So these examples provided in the MPGs relate to existing NDCs. Now it's the indicator of net greenhouse gas emissions and removals is an indicator, or the percentage of reductions of greenhouse gas emissions is another indicator, or the indicators related to policies and measures. In using indicators, the Enhanced Transparency Framework was very clever, or parties who negotiated this were clever, because it was possible to accommodate the diversity of NDCs, which results from their nationally determined nature. Additionally, there are specific reporting obligations related to indicators, and the information will be provided in the biennial transparency reports. And the information shall be reported in so-called common tabular formats, which are tables, but they are officially known as the common tabular formats. So the information that shall be reported includes the description of the selected indicators, the definitions needed to understand each indicator, the methodology or accounting approach used to generate the information for each indicator. And then, very importantly for tracking progress over time, it's the values of the indicators in the base year, in each year of the NDC period, and because the NDC period includes also its final year, this is what allows doing the comparison, the tracking progress and achievement. No, you compare your indicator values over time. And then finally, if it is possible, the projections of the key indicators, which is an important policy tool because you look into the future, how you expect your indicator to develop, and then If this is not happening with your yearly values, ideally policymakers would adapt. So PATPA has produced a knowledge product specifically on NDC progress indicators. You can expect from this knowledge product a lot of background information and practical examples related to different types of NDC targets. And in the following slides, I will just give a brief insight into what is in the publication, but it is really full of detail, so I have not enough time to go into all this detail. So one of the central concepts in the knowledge product is the SMART concept, which you may be familiar with. It is used for targets, for defining targets. No, the targets, they need to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And the very attentive listener might have noticed, what? It doesn't say achievable there, it says ambitious. And this is because this knowledge product was constructed in the context of the Paris Agreement, and their ambition is a key feature. So once you have SMART targets, this concept also becomes relevant for the indicators, because a SMART target gives information on what indicator can be used for tracking this target. The indicator should also be specific. It should be measurable. It should reflect or be able to reflect the ambitious. It should be relevant to the action behind the target, and it should be time bound. So it should be relevant to the time frame in which the target needs to be achieved. The knowledge product also refers to a framework called the intervention logic chain, which works by developing a narrative how a specific action will unfold and what its results will be. The results directly in the influence sphere of the action are called outputs. A little bit further away, results that are expected but not directly influenced are known as outcomes, and the long-term results are referred to as impacts. So in this example you see here, the action would be the electrification of the bus fleet, an output would be the increased number of electric buses, and so on. And what is useful is that in each one of these phases, it is possible to identify specific indicators that would allow to identify if these expected outputs, outcomes, and impacts are being achieved. So, for example, the direct output is the number of electric buses in the fleet. If you are attentive, you will also have noticed that this is a nice example, but what is missing is the overarching target. Now, what is the target related to buses? But yeah, that brings me to the next slide. So what the knowledge product also does is it presents a step-by-step process for identifying and compiling progress indicators. And step 1 and 2 are very related to the target. So first, the country needs to identify and assess the NDC target. So what have we put forward? And what are we going to track? And in case in the communication to the outside world, the target has not been made smart, then this is work a country will benefit from if it makes the target smart. So specific, defining the scope, the unit, what is the reference level. And this is an important step to also do with relevant stakeholders who will be responsible for implementing actions to achieve the target. So once a target is smart, step 3 is to identify the suitable indicators to track your progress. Once this is done, it is necessary to identify the data and the methodology that will be used to compile information on the target, to calculate to calculate values of the indicator. And finally, all this information needs to be compiled, reported, and very importantly, it must be documented and archived so the work steps can be repeated, because tracking progress of NDCs and compiling information on the necessary indicators will be a regular task that all parties need to do from now on to report in their BTRs. So the knowledge product also includes specific informations on these common tabular formats. Here on the slide, you see one where the indicator is net greenhouse gas emissions and removals and CO2 equivalents. Table 1 asks for a description of the selected indicator, now and the reference level, and this party put in, yes, my value in 1990. Then the table also asks whether there were any updates. In this case, one would fill out, okay, yes, there was an update. We had a methodological change. We recalculated, so we put in the initial value and the new value for transparency. And a very important information for understanding what is going on is also what is the relationship between the indicator and the NDC. And this is asked because, as the obligation says, the indicator needs to be relevant for the NDC. This is a brief example of the common tabular format table 2. It's a mouthful, which asks for definitions needed for understanding the indicator. In this case, it's the same indicator. The definition would relate to, okay, where does this information come from, and the scope of my NDC. So they are the same. That is the clarification the party could be making in the BTR. And finally, adaptation. No, not finally, but adaptation is also a very, very important aspect of climate action, and it is addressed in the enhanced transparency framework and also in the knowledge product. So here you have an overview of the information that would need to be reported for adaptation. For example, how adaptation increased resilience and reduced impacts, when adaptation is not sufficient to avert impacts, and how effective implemented adaptation measures are. So for adaptation targets, there are also examples in the knowledge product, and I wanted to also make reference again to this intervention logic framework, because this can be helpful for identifying relevant indicators for tracking progress in adaptation actions. Yes, so that is my presentation on NDC progress indicators. Thank you very much. Sophie, do you want me to do the Mentimeter right now, or do we wait for questions?
I think before we're going to head into the Mentimeter, maybe we're going to see if someone has a question. I've already also seen that Daniel was so kind to share some of his work specifically on the transport sector. Yeah, there's already some collaboration going on in the chat. But yeah, maybe wait if someone has some questions or maybe wants to share their experience with either the GHG inventories or the NDC tracking that they're currently having, or maybe also share some of the needs that they've identified. Yes, Liz, Philip raised their hand.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Christina. Elizabeth from Malaysia.
Hello.
And thank you for your presentation. I actually wanted to seek clarification. When we talk about the indicators, it is basically the indicators for the tracking the progress of the NDC implementation, right? So you could have 1 or 2 indicators, right? So
yes.
I actually have another question following to that. For the policy and measures part. So on that, what do we need to write? We just write on some of the main targets of the policy and measures, is it? Policy measures action plan.
Yes, so there is a specific common tabular format as well to report on mitigation policies, actions, and measures. And so you would report on the mitigation, you would name the policy, and you would express the target of this policy, and deriving from that target, you would define the indicator for that policy. Oops.
Okay, thank you for the question, Liz, and thank you for the answer, Christina. Liz, has your question been answered? Your hand still up, or?
Yeah, I'm actually trying to put my hand down, but it's not going down. But I also have another
and
question.
yeah, sorry, and also to complement. So I have to clarify. So if your target is expressed, like if your NDC is expressed in policies and measures, this applies what I said, that you define the indicator and then you track your policy and measure. Yes, but table 5 is specific for policies and measures. And there the information is specified in the table. So for each policy and measure, you do not need the indicator. So that's the distinction. What is your type to NDC? If it's policies and measures, you need the indicator. And otherwise, the policies and measures related to your NDC, you report in table 5. I was maybe not so clear in my first answer. Yes, and then you need to name the policy and describe it. And I think you also have to put in what type it is, what type of policy or what type of instrument it is. Yeah, so I suggest you go and look into the Contabular format table 5.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. So do we need to actually have the policies and measures for all the sectors listed under table 5, or just um, um, the most important policies? It is not NDC with policy and measures.
Okay, so Lorenz, maybe you know the number of the paragraph by head, but I don't know the number. But there's one paragraph in the MPGs that says something that it is those policies and measures with the most impact or the most relevant ones.
Yes, that's correct. I wouldn't know the paragraph, but I remember that's the wording. So you focus on policies and measures which have the largest mitigation impact. I could just add one more thing. So in addition to the table on the policies and measures, which Christina explained, there is also the table where you put down information on the indicator. So it's the table which is part of the structured summary. So if you don't have a quantitative target, but your target consists of policies and measures, then you can also fill in some information there. And it could be very simple that you just document whether the policy and measure has been completed, or you could document in which phase the policy and measure is. So that's in case you don't have quantitative information related to your target. And we have in that knowledge product, so in that report on the indicators, we have in the annex examples for various types of indicators. So for example, if it's policies and measures, and if it's co-benefits of economic diversification, for example, for those various types of targets and indicators, we have an example what you could report there. So for the targets, we have examples which indicator you could use and what you could enter in the table for the structured summary. So that's in the annex of that report on pages 36 and 37. So that's just some examples which may be helpful to look into.
Perfect. Thank you both so much. Are there any other questions? Apart from, I do see, I think we've agreed that it's paragraph 80. And it's been confirmed. Yeah, are there any other questions on either GHG inventories, the NDC progress tracking, or maybe something else you'd like to ask? Yes, I think, so I see Lawrence and I see someone else from our participants. Maybe Lawrence, if you want to go first quickly, and then just.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add one comment to what Christina presented. Christina was talking about making targets and indicators smarter. Just to point out that there are opportunities still to update both the targets and the indicators. So it's if parties update their NDCs, that's an opportunity also to think about the target, whether it's really smart or whether it could be updated. And then when you report on progress in your BTR every 2 years, that's an opportunity. Then you could also think about other targets and indicators smart. Just to give some background on, yes, there are often opportunities to rethink what was put forward so far, and basically to improve both the targets and the indicators. But that was just a comment and addition. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for adding it and complementing it. I see a question in the chat, but I was wondering if the person who just raised their hand maybe wants to come in or also write in the chat about that. Otherwise,
there's this question of how can the mitigation co-benefits of adaptation measures be reported. So it goes back to defining the target. If you define your NDC as, okay, my NDC will be a mitigation co-benefit, the type, no? Then in your planning or discussion process, you will probably have identified what that mitigation co-benefit is. And ideally, you will have identified where you expect it to be in your target year. And then again, the process, as we described in the knowledge product, would apply again. So if you're, I don't know, I'm inventing, but assuming an adaptation action is the reforesting an area that might be subject to landslides, and we're doing this because of adaptation purposes, but we are expecting not growing trees, they absorb CO2, so we can, okay, these are going to be the hectares I'm reforesting. I could calculate the mitigation co-benefit, and then I can report on that. That would be one way of reporting a mitigation co-benefit.
Perfect, thank you. Now we actually have 2 more questions. And before we're going to go to the one in the chat, I'm going to ask the person who raised their hand to please come in.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity. This is Shou Huan Tao from China. Sorry, I didn't change my name in English. I have a quick question concerning about the CTF table 5. I would like to know how's your understanding about the sector being affected. So in this table 5, we need to put the sector that's related to the climate action. And according to the footnote, there are like energy, transport, industrial, like IPPU, agriculture. How's your understanding about transport? Because currently we are preparing for this table and we are a bit not quite sure about whether the sector is related to the inventory or it is different with the sector that's included in inventory. So I would like to know your understanding. Thank you.
Lawrence, do you want to reply to that first?
Yes, happy to reply to this question. So when the tables were agreed in Glasgow, there's actually several areas in the tables where they do not come with a complete list of definitions, and there is some ambiguity. And so my understanding is that the sectors would be in line with the greenhouse gas inventory sectors. So their transport would be the subsector of the energy sector as defined in the common reporting tables. So that's my understanding. And I think it was also like in earlier times, for example, in biannual reports, a similar reporting was already done. And this approach was taken. But yeah, there are a few things, for example, in the tables or in the outcome of Glasgow, where you don't have the perfect definitions, but where also it helps just exchanging with others and checking what was reported so far. And here my understanding is it would be a subsector of the energy sector.
Thanks for your reply. I think it's very clear. I have a follow-up question. So when the action is related directly to transport, for example, the clean energy of the car, so we should put it as energy or put it as transport? What's your understanding?
Yeah, so it would be in the transport sector because basically it's an action which reduces greenhouse gas emissions from cars, for example, and then the sector in which the mitigation action took place would be the transport sector in that example.
So may I double check that you mean that transport is a specific subsector? So, for example, if it's related to some subsectors other than transport, we should put it as the sector related to GHG inventory. But for transport, we can put it as put transport directly. Am I right?
That's basically the decision which was made in Glasgow. Let's use the same sectors which were also listed in Katowice, so those 6 sectors. And then it was decided, let's just also list transport. And there's a good reason for it, because it's an important subsector of energy, but it's just a different categorization compared to what was agreed in Glasgow, and again, a little bit different from what's in the IPCC guidelines. It's just a little bit of a change, but I think it's clear from, or there's a clear practice what is reported where.
Thank you so much for your question and also for your answer, Lawrence. Okay, so there was also a question in the chat about whether we maybe are aware of similar resources like case studies, indicators, or targets with regard to the food and agriculture sector.
So maybe I can also come in here quickly. And I know that FAO actually has many knowledge products also on the food and agriculture sector. And I already was Googling it, but apparently the site is down, the website in the moment. But I shared a link with you anyways. Yeah, but maybe Lawrence and Christina, I think you also just wanted to add something on that. So please, over to you again.
Yes, thank you. Just quickly, for the agriculture sector, I would say if you're looking for indicators to track progress in the agriculture sector, there it could also be indicators that are related to policies and measures. And what I'm doing, I'm just sharing very briefly the knowledge product we have been speaking about, just because it came up, the question of a specific policy and measure. That's what you can see here, or also the question of co-benefits of adaptation actions. And here you can see an example what you can fill in such a table. If it's actions, for example, in agriculture sector, you could fill in your progress in the various phases of your actions. And if it's a measure in agriculture which also have co-benefits, like if it increases removals of CO2 or if it decreases emissions, then that's just an example how you can report it in this table. So it's just an example how you can really fill in the table, which requires data for indicators, and which is a bit tricky if you don't have greenhouse gas emissions and removals, but if you have policies and measures in various sectors.
Okay, thank you for that. Does anyone else have any more questions? Otherwise, I think we can continue with the little Mentimeter task that Christina prepared.
Yeah,
Or...
we were thinking of making things a little bit more interactive or concrete. So if you could share with us, maybe you are a country representative and you know this by heart because it's your bread and butter of every day, or maybe you just know about your country because you're very, very, very informed. So what is the NDC type of your country? Oh, sorry. Because I changed presentation, now nobody knows how to get to the Menti. Okay, so if you are on a computer, please put in menti.com and then put in this code 18673194, or you can also use this QR code to access the Menti. So I don't know if people are already in. I'll give you a little time. So I expect we have now participants in the Menti. So I will get the presentation again of the Menti. Aha, we already have some answers. It's moving. Okay, we have no intensity target. No, yes, we have an intensity target. But yeah, the most common is the absolute emission reduction target relative to a base year. Okay, I don't know, Sophie, how we are with time, but I would move on to the next question, which is, what indicator will you use to track progress of your NDC? So please type in your response. We will be seeing a word cloud of the responses. And so if we have indicators being mentioned several times, the word will become larger. So it could, for example, be the net greenhouse gas emissions. It could be hectares, if you're talking about forests. It could be percent of greenhouse gas emission reduction is also an indicator. And if you are not sure, you can also type in a question mark. Yeah, so what we see here, so we said GDP. GDP is one component of an indicator for the intensity target, but of course it's important. Ton CO2 equivalent. Aha, we have non-CO2 gases that will be tracked and reported. Greenhouse gas emissions, the deforestation area as an indicator. Aha, the renewable energy. The indicator probably would be more concrete, so it maybe is a share of renewable energy in the national grid. We have a question mark. Okay, very interesting. Next, how would you rate the data availability for tracking progress of your NDC? We have prepared some options. Maybe you are early in the beginning, you have no data yet, or you have some, but you're still working on it because there's still time for preparing the BTRs, or maybe you're very advanced. Everything is available. I will wait for some more responses. We had around 17 last time, so wait a bit. Yeah, I mean, it is March. Countries are probably still working very intensely. And then as you will, if you go into the knowledge product, there are some good hints for how to collect data, and also maybe consider the steps of documenting and archiving the data you're collecting so it can be re-accessed over time. Okay, moving on. What are the main challenges you see for tracking progress over time? You can be free to write what you want, because it will be showing all the little answers. It's not a word cloud. We will have the responses popping up once we have them. So maybe it is challenges you are currently encountering, or you have heard. Maybe you know from other stakeholders that what their challenges are. The governance, data, because, yeah. Sometimes data is not available in time when it is needed. Changing priorities, probably this refers to political priorities, if there is a shifting focus and then maybe also resources go away. If there are data gaps, then how does one deal with, it needs to be reported, but not all data is available. Lawrence mentioned ways to addressing data gaps. Okay, financial support. Policy changes and consistency challenges. This one with the FIO is also a data consistency challenge, a methodological challenge. The delays, now we had that political will. If there are gaps in data provision, that might cause a gap in the time series. Clear targets, yeah. Related to the SMART, if the target is not clear, it's very hard to track progress. Okay. So thank you very much. I think this always reflecting back on challenges is also helpful for then better supporting countries to addressing these challenges. Okay. So Sophie, this was the last Mentimeter question. I would now stop sharing my screen.
Thank you for this little exercise, and thank all of you for participating in it. Maybe actually staying on some of those challenges. I'd first like maybe our experts to, if they have any immediate thoughts or potential recommendations or ways to address these before, and then while they do so, maybe you all can think about whether you want to share maybe some more details on those challenges that you're experiencing or on the needs that you're having. So maybe Lawrence, Christina, do you have any immediate? I see Lawrence is already on it.
Yes, actually, I forgot turning off my mic, but happy to reply first. So on the challenges, I would say what helps is making use of the experience from earlier reporting. So for example, in biannual update reports, also biannual reports, there was also reporting on progress in the nationally appropriate mitigation actions. So some parties really did a very good job there, provided very detailed information. So early reports are a source of information, also reports from other countries who are maybe at a similar level, and then just that's a good source of information. And then, of course, we have got the concept of continuous improvement. The first BTR will not be perfect, and it's clear, I think, to every party where there are still gaps, and then the next one can be better. So this should not discourage those writing the report from doing so. Just you have to be aware that not everything is there, and the task is now to provide information as far as available, knowing the challenges, but still being aware that it's important to provide such a report as required by the Paris Agreement, and then improving it over time.
Thank you so much. Christina, do you want to add something?
Yeah, to complement this idea of improving over time, maybe it's also helpful to think about prioritizing. So if you have identified a data gap or many data gaps, and it will not be possible to address them all for this first BTR, then it probably identify which is most important for knowing what you're doing in terms of how, if your NDC is being effective, but also prioritize in terms maybe of what is policy relevant, because this is filling a data gap that will be relevant for then better implementing the policies. So that is a way of prioritizing.
Very, very good point indeed. So do any of you maybe want to share some more specifics around the challenges, the needs you experience, or maybe also already some tips of how you've overcome them? Okay, I'm going to give you some more time. In the meantime, I think Christina wants to also add something to what she said before.
Yes, no, another point, another challenge, because somebody mentioned the governance challenge. And so the question was specific for tracking progress over time. So I wanted to also refer to a very good knowledge product by the consultative group of experts. They have developed a publication on institutional arrangements for transparency, and I really recommend that one, because there are very different aspects of institutional arrangements and governance, and how to advance this to establish transparency systems in countries that work over time and have maybe accountability within the institutions and involved stakeholders. I recommend that. I will try to find the link.
Perfect, thank you. So as of now, I don't see anything specific in the chat. Again, maybe one last shout to everyone who would like to share the experience. Thank you, Simona, for adding the CG toolbox. Well, okay, if there's nothing at the moment, I think we can continue. So we've kind of already now discussed some of the, or you shared with us some of the challenges you've had, which kind of fits quite well into the next little part, which Simona will share some of the support we as PATPA also provide bilaterally. So Simona, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, and I will again also share my screen. Yeah, and as Sophie also already mentioned, we in PATPA, like in the Partnership on Transparency, in the Paris Agreement, we have the so-called Climate Help Desk. And some of you might already heard about it, but we wanted to draw your attention again on this opportunity for bilateral support. And here on this slide, I'm already showing you some examples of assistance that can be provided under the Climate Help Desk, which is, for instance, reviewing also GHG inventories for specific sectors, for example, also the waste sector, since we have worked on that today. We can also offer support for the preparation of countries for the ETF and on climate reporting requirements in general under the UNFCCC. For instance, the biannual transparency report that needs to be submitted by the end of this year. So yeah, our support is wide ranged, and I want to stress here, and you can, I will try to use this laser pointer as well. You can see that here below. So it's really a rapid or a quick support, also short term. So normally it doesn't last longer than 3 months, but it's really, we try to be as tailored to your specific country context. And if you notice, for instance, while preparing the BTR or the GHG inventory, that your team is lacking on a specific training or information, then we could support you with the Climate Help Desk. So our modes of delivery are also executed through various formats. So as I already mentioned, it could be a in-country workshop, but we could also share studies, analysis reports, as we're doing now in this webinar. But it can be also technical review or expert guidance on national and sectoral climate policies, for instance. So you may wonder now, okay, how can I actually apply for it, and what are the eligibility criteria to submit actually a request to this Climate Help Desk? And there are some criteria that we need to fulfill. So it should be related to transparency issues, so on reporting, but also it can be in conjunction with NDCs or LTS, so everything that falls under the Paris Agreement. We wish for a clear country ownership during the entire process. The country who requests should be a member of the ODA country list. We also always need a endorsement by a national institution or and also the UNFCCC focal point of the specific country. And since ours, the climate help desk normally is a very short and direct support to one specific activity in the country, we always try to be complementary with other ongoing activities in the country. So we coordinate and align with all our partner institutions like CBIT, GSP, UNDP, ICAT, UNEP, and so on. And last but not least, we hope also for a buy-in of key national stakeholders in the consulting process. And how can you apply, or how can countries actually make a request to this climate help desk? It's actually a quite easy step, and we have a short concept note. It's only 1 or 2 pages on our website, so you could just fill in the information there and send an email then to our climate help desk email address, which is climate.helpdesk@giz.de. And we would be very happy to get in contact with you and receive your request. Also, if you have any questions regarding this webinar session, I'm very happy to stay in touch and see if we could in the future work together on some specific country issues that you may have noticed also during the session or already came into the session. So that's all from my side, and over again to you, Sophie.
Thank you so much for that quick overview. With that, we're at the moment are at the end actually of the content of today's webinar that we've prepared for you. Again, I think just for one last time, if you do have any questions, feel free to ask them now, write them in the chat. You could also email us later if you want to about those. So if you have any questions that anything maybe come up on the inputs or on the climate help desk that was just presented. Well, maybe while you have a think, I can kind of, thank you, Elizabeth. It was also nice to meet you. Well, while you, maybe all of you have some more things, if there is anything coming up, please feel free to write in the chat. I could maybe sum up some of the hopeful messages that at least I've heard today, for which maybe one was that while there is definitely a challenge, and clearly you're also experiencing it, of having data available and also having like maybe also data available for a longer time period, there's definitely ways to kind of get around it or to work on it, using, for example, proxy time series, or also kind of exchange with other countries on the data that they've used. I've heard positive, more detail on like where you can find your information, whether that's with our knowledge products or the knowledge products of the FAO, or the UNFCCC or CGE. And I think what I really liked were the last two one of the last two recommendations of Lawrence and Christina, in terms of, this is not about submitting a perfect BTL, but it's about improving over time and from now on, and to kind of just prioritize the current needs and what's possible to do. I do think I saw Christina having her hand up and wanting to share something, or was I mistaken? Okay, well then I was mistaken. So kind of after those a few hopeful messages, I'd like to thank all of you for participating and joining us today. I also like to join our speakers for sharing their knowledge and insights with us. The presentations and the recording will be published on our website. So if you want to kind of go back to those, you can find everything there. And with that, we would like to invite you to our last webinar tomorrow. It's going to be the third and, as I said, the last one of our webinar series. And it's going to be, again, kind of on this how-to transparency, but this time we really want to kind of get started on it. And we're going to look at the BTR guidance roadmap tool. It's like a bit of an older tool we have, but we think it's very, very good and comprehensive. And we'll also actually have two country representatives, well, Peru and a representative of the Caribbean states coming in and kind of just sharing their experience and their progress and what they've been dealing with so far. So we're really, really looking forward to that. That being said, we wish you all a great rest of the day, and we'll look forward to welcoming you back to a third and final webinar tomorrow.